academic centres that are teaching religious studies and philosophy and comparative philosophy. I do my bit in my own work. Anyone that wants to study with me for a degree, or come and be a research student here, I have some space for that, and I'm happy to have serious students come and work alongside me. So I want to finish with a little story here from the Druid tradition, because obviously you know that I have a deep interest in the Druid path, and I've written about Druidry, and to me the Druid is the Celtic equivalent of these prophetic visionaries like Paul, Muhammad and Christ even. I mean, the Druid was a seer in their own right who had the duty of bringing peace to the tribes, long before Christianity, long before Islam, certainly as old as Judaism, and actually probably older. The Druid traditions go back to the times of Avebury and Stonehenge and Newgrange. These are thousands of years before Christ, and before Abraham. Abraham was 1750 BC. No, we're going back into mythical history, the times of Enoch, the times of Adam and Noah and so on. In the Bible, that period is very truncated in Genesis. The Druid teachings deal with that time period, and that's their origin. And it's a very interesting thing, and I've been giving talks about Druidry. You can listen to them on my Green University website. Here I just want to mention one little snippet that's in my mind at the moment, because I'm very, very worried about the effect of Brexit, as people know, on Ireland, and the revival of Irish conflict. And it has to be prevented. This is why, as chair of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission for Britain and Ireland, I'm saying no Brexit, please. It cannot happen. And every strategy, I'm utterly dismayed that the Labour Party under Corbyn somehow hasn't worked this out. Either that, or he's been bullied or blackmailed into backing Theresa May. I don't know what they've done. Threatened his family, found some dark secret in his past they're threatening to reveal. The guy seems to lack the moral intelligence that Brexit has to be stopped. So I despair of him. And I have written to him and pointed these facts out. And of course, he never has the intelligence or the courtesy even to reply. At least with Theresa May, you're going to reply. So the Irish problem absolutely torments me, and I wake up, at night in fear that this conflict is going to start again. I was involved indirectly behind the scenes with the Good Friday Agreement in 1998, and Tony Blair was a very intelligent Labour Prime Minister before he was blackmailed into supporting the Iraq War. And he had an instinctive understanding of the importance of peace, and so that's why he's, like me, 100% against Brexit, 1,000% against Brexit. Now, I want to tell a little story from Irish history that probably isn't much known. The greatest king of Ireland was a man called Cormac Mac Airt. Now, Cormac was a very just and true and righteous king, and he's the exemplar of all Irish children learn about Cormac Mac Airt. He in his reign, which took place, he's an historical figure who lived from about 200 to 270 AD, so in the 3rd century AD, after Christ, but before Ireland had got the Christ story. There were probably pockets of people discussing in the port towns and stuff, things they'd heard in Britain, which already had some Christian people pockets. But it wasn't a Christian culture yet, it was a Druid culture in Ireland. And Cormac ruled Ireland justly because he was scrupulous about his attention to truth. Now, the most important and exciting thing about Cormac is a certain story which has come down, The Adventure of Cormac, it's called. And one time he had this mysterious visitor appear in his castle. He lived in this magnificent castle. He was the High King of Ireland, so this was at Tara. And this magnificent stranger appeared and offered him all kinds of gifts and, glamour, what they're like. And that seemed all fine, and Cormac was happy to entertain him, and they had the bards come on and some poets telling stories. And then this stranger said, well, do you mind if I sleep with your wife? Cormac had a very beautiful wife, as the High Kings did. And Cormac got a bit upset at that point, and if not to say angry. And he chased the man out of the building, as he should have done. And so he then pursued him, and he followed the stranger, quite a long journey. And then the guy took off in a ship, so he followed him in a ship. And eventually he came to this magical island off the west coast of Ireland, tracked the stranger down, had been following his ship for a couple of days, and came to this magical island, which had a huge castle in the middle. And he went in, and then he found that the stranger was none other than the sea god, Manannán Mac Lir. I love these stories. This is an Irish fable, very ancient, oral, Druid tale. And the stranger apologised. He said, look, I'm sorry, O king. Yes, okay. I should have told you. I'm actually the king of the sea. I'm Manannán Mac Lir. In Greece they call me Poseidon. In Rome, Neptune, you know. I apologise, but it's the only way I could get you here. Because I love what you're doing as a king, and I want to give you a gift. And Cormac sort of forgave him and apologised, and they were made up and had a glass of mead. And Manannán Mac Lir said, look, Cormac, I want to give you this gift. It's a cup, it's a chalice. It's a chalice of pure gold. More beautiful than this. I have some chalices, but not here. And I want to give you this gift because what it does, this is a magical chalice. If somebody in its presence tells a lie, it breaks apart into pieces. And if somebody in its presence tells the truth, it comes back into one form, and it goes back into being a chalice. And this is the best gift I can give you as a king, because after this gift you will always be able to do righteous judgments in your cases in court. You will always be able to tell if you know what is the situation here, who's telling me the truth. You see, the worst thing as a ruler or a king or a president or a prime minister or a queen is when people don't tell you the truth. And so this was an amazing gift. And I mean, I think that's the problem we're suffering from now. People are not telling the truth. So anyway, Cormac went back, thanking Manannán Mac Lir for this incredible gift, and he reinstalled himself in Tara and became the wisest and justest and best king Ireland has ever known. And he ruled the whole land, by the way, north, south, east and west. And it was a time of plenty, and you know, the streams were full of salmon, and the cows gave so much milk that there weren't enough pails to carry it in. And the women were so beautiful that, you know, everyone was in love with them, and the men were all heroic, handsome heroes. And that most handsome of all those heroes was McCool, who you may have heard of, who was the greatest of all the Irish noble warriors. And McCool lived at the time of Cormac Mac Airt. And he served him as his bodyguard and the head of his roving band of knights, essentially, who, just like the knights of King Arthur's day, a few centuries later, their job was to go around the land and make sure that nobody was being oppressed, that the poor were not being, abused, and that the powerful were not misusing their power and so on. So they were like the knights of Cormac Mac Airt. And McCool was the bravest and the best of them all. And their stories have come down in the Fianna cycle, which have inspired Irish mythologists and poets ever since, and bards. But there was a historical basis to all this. Now, I want to come fast forward because it ends sadly. And this is a morality tale, right? That golden age of Cormac Mac Airt, who had the chalice of truth, was shattered. When Cormac died, his son, Cairbre, took power. And his son was not a righteous man. His son was not such a good man, not such a wise king. And to cut a long story short, eventually, Cairbre clashed with the Fianna, with McCool and his son Oisin and his grandson Oscar. And tragically it led to a huge battle called the Battle of Gowra under the son of Cormac Mac Airt at the time of Cairbre. And there was a terrible battle and a slaughter. And it was the destruction of the Fianna, the destruction of Finn McCool's force of knights. They turned on their own king because the king had become unjust. And it ended in a civil war. And according to the poets and bards, the tales we have, Oscar, the grandson of Finn McCool, killed Cairbre at the same time as Cairbre killed him. So they're locked in this mortal embrace, and the one stabs the other in the heart, and the other one puts a lance in the other guy, and they both die. Now this is a symbol of all that is worst about war. This story is something that is ingrained into every Irish child, and every Irish lover of Ireland knows this story. Right? I'm part Irish, so that's why I've made the effort to learn this story. And it's not taught in English schools. English kids haven't got a clue about all this history. This history was ancient before the first Englishman or woman ever stepped onto the soil of the British Isles. These stories go back to very, very early sources, and they're Druidic tales, who were the seers of ancient Ireland and the whole of Britain. Okay. And this is part of European Celtic civilization, which you know I'm studying and coming from as a philosopher myself. So the point we can learn from this story, and then tragically, after his grandson Oscar had been killed and the terrible tragedy of this civil war had broken out, Finn McCool eventually himself was killed. There are different theories, but one theory has that he was tracked down by 5 men from Cairbrae's army, and they cornered him at a place, and they killed him. You know, the greatest warrior, who was now getting old, he was a grandfather, and he was killed. You know, and there goes the warrior. Another has him being killed at a ford after a great heroic struggle, and then he's killed. But he died. Finn McCool died as a result of this civil war. So what I'm saying is, and this is a man who was also a Druid. Finn McCool had taken the Salmon of Wisdom as a young apprentice and could have become a Druid. He chose to become a warrior Druid, which is always a very dangerous path. I say no. Stick with the pure Druid. Teach the warriors, but don't become one of them. And then later, the story of the Irish Druid tradition is very interesting, because it's said that Finn McCool himself reincarnated later as a Mongan. But that's another story. You can read my books about this. The point I want to make, and why I'm saying this on this, to honour the sad death of Leonardo da Vinci and to try and stop those tears from coming, is that I'm trying to stop the future tears of the people of Ireland that will be crying after the deaths start again in you know, Northern Ireland over this, because we're dealing here with intergenerational, indeed I would say interincarnational violence that has accumulated for centuries. This is a karmic war. I mean, which I as a Druid can see, because I can see very, very long-term trends over historical time. That's what my thesis is on, transpersonal history. And so from a transpersonal historical perspective, I know that this Brexit thing is going to trick-start this rebirth of the Civil War of Ireland, which is, you know, the trouble with the Celts. I love them, but they're so, you know, give a Celt a chance and they will start having a civil war. Get 2 people in a pub, give them too much mead, they'll start having a civil war, unless they listen to the Druid, and you know, have actually done a proper education somewhere. I'm praying that enough intelligent people throughout the British Isles, Northern Ireland, will realise that we don't want to go back to that civil war that broke out with Cairbre and the death of Finn McCool. We want to choose the Druid path of wisdom, which came from Manannán Mac Lir in this sacred chalice. This is why I keep emphasising that we have to get politicians to swear an oath of truth. that they will speak the truth on the floor of the House of Commons or the Lords or the Parliaments of Ireland or Wales or Scotland or in the US Congress. If this cup of Manannán Mac Lir can be brought into these places, as it can, because it's a metaphysical cup, it's actually the Holy Grail. The Holy Grail is the same cup as Manannán Mac Lir gave to Cormac, because that is the single most important thing that can bring peace, which is truth. And that's what Gandhi knew. That's why he called the peace workers satyagrahis. They're people that are holding the cup of Manannán Mac Lir. And to do that, you have to have patient perseverance. You have to have this quality of sabr. You have to have intellect, logic, reason. That's what a true scholar does. That's what a true Sufi does, or a true sage. That's what Leonardo did. And, you know, that's why we have to put a top floor on the Pentagon. We are only going to do that if people start telling the truth in Congress, if people listen to my talks, if you share my talks with people that know people that know people. Get the message out that chalice of truth has the power and the energy to bring peace on this planet, but only if enough people start living by it, if enough people take up that challenge. And yes, I don't want to live through the tragedy of the civil wars that broke out after Carberry took power, and, you know, the breakup and the death of Finn McCool and Oscar. It's interesting, by the way, that Oscar became the name of a couple of kings of Sweden because Field Marshal Bernadotte, who was sent by the French to become king of Sweden at the time of Napoleon, became king of Sweden, and he fell in love with an Irish woman and married her, and they had a son, and they called him Oscar. And that chap, Oscar I, became king of Sweden for quite a few decades. And then in turn, he had a son called Oscar, who became Oscar II, who was king of Sweden right up into the 20th century. And the reason for that was because Bernadette, as a great warrior in the Napoleonic Empire, loved the Irish tales of you know, the Fenian cycle, as put down by James Macpherson, who had got them from the oral sources of the Highlands of Scotland and embellished them a lot. Yes, Johnson said, no, they're all embellishments. No, I think Johnson was wrong. He was an English nationalist, didn't understand that, yes, there were oral traditions in the Highlands that had come from Ireland, and that all Macpherson did was collect them and add a bit. Well, any self-respecting poet always adds bits. So that Oscar story that I've shared with you today, or a little tiny bit of it, entered the canon of European literature. Goethe knew it, he loved it. Napoleon slept with Macpherson's book under his pillow most of the day, most of the times when he was on campaign. So he saw himself as a heroic warrior in that Irish tradition. Fine. What I'm saying is, even the heroic warriors die in time, and we should do what Sweden's done, which is go away from militarism and become a peace nation. Take up the path of peace, and found an institute in London, like their Stockholm Institute of International Peace Research. I've been working for a London Institute of International Peace Research, and I'll continue to do that, till that comes into being as well. So there we are. That's my final thing, and thank you, Leonardo, for coming and living here in France and inspiring us. And I hope that your tears stop. I know they won't stop fully till we get peace on this planet, until we build that Nonagon, the 9-sided building on the top of the Pentagon. So please send us your grace and blessings, and send us the blessings of the angels in heaven to make that possible. And finally, send us sabr, send us patient perseverance and prayer to make that feasible. Thank you.